Hello, and from me, Jenny Devitt, a very warm welcome to this April 2026 edition of the BV podcast, in which we bring you a small selection of some of the stories from around this lovely county of Dorset. So, in this edition, we'll be hearing, in reverse order, from Trevor Bailey about what he's calling the assault on rural England by housing developers. And an example of one of the gems to be found in rural Dorset, weaver Debbie Kirby tells us how her lifetime of creating exquisite silk scarves and other items began. And across Dorset and Wiltshire, 8 fire stations are threatened with possible closure, and Cranborne Fire Station is on the list. Gavin Fauvel of that station will tell us more. We'll start, as ever, on the BV podcast by hearing from our editor, Laura Hitchcock. Here she is with her letter.
I came to the slightly surreal realisation this week that we now live in a world where we don't believe a word the President of the United States says. And it's not just an American problem. Believing and trusting the decision makers feels like a really big ask right now. We've looked at the proposed fire station closures this month. You won't have missed the headlines, but we wanted to get into the detail. And this is one of our emergency services. What's actually being decided is what happens to some of us when something goes wrong and help is further away than it used to be. These decisions rest on data, so when the Fire Brigades Union suggests that the data may already be out of date, it raises a simple question. Are we comfortable with what we're basing this important decision on? In the history section, there's a photo essay on Sidling St Nicholas in 1947. It's one of my favourite features this month, actually. It's on page 64 in the magazine. A photographer captured people going about their day, just a village being itself. I find the images oddly moving. They show an unremarkable, deeply rooted way of life. It's what gives Dorset its shape, its identity, its memory. And it's that ever-increasing loss of this thing that is at the heart of Trevor Bailey's open letter on page 15. He talks about how government policy is driving an unprecedented assault on rural England. It's difficult to ignore the sense that something is shifting. Across the county, communities are increasingly angry that decisions are being made about places rather than with them. Decision-making is so much easier if you look at data sets and not at lives being lived. None of this is simple. Dorset isn't a museum piece, and it shouldn't be. Villages change, towns grow, they always have. But there's a difference between change you choose and change that arrives, unwanted, without explanation. And that difference comes down to whether you trust how those decisions are being made.
BV editor Laura Hitchcock. The Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service recently announced a planned closure of 8 fire stations across the 2 counties, Charmouth, Cranborne, Hamworthy and Maiden Newton in Dorset, and Bradford-on-Avon, Mere, Wilton and Ramsbury in Wiltshire. Gavin Fauvel is a Fire Brigades Union member for Cranborne Fire Station. I asked him if the decision to close these 8 stations was a foregone conclusion.
Well, I mean, the worry amongst retained firefighters and the 8 retained stations that have been proposed for closure is just that. Has the decision already been made? And is the public consultation period, which we're in the middle of, runs out in the 15th of May, is that really a sort of jumping through the hoops process-led consultation, or is it really a foregone conclusion? We have sought reassurances from the fire service and the fire authority when they've come and held their public meetings here and when they've come to see us as firefighters, that that's genuinely not the case, and the public consultation is an opportunity for everyone to express their views. Now, of course, I would defy anybody in a village such as Cranborne, if they're asked, would you like Cranborne Fire Station to close or stay open? I defy anybody to say anything other than stay open. So it'd be interesting to see. So that I think it's going to be a question of making sure there's a voluminous reply to that question. Yes, we want it to stay open. I suppose the only comfort is just yesterday Oxfordshire Fire Service announced that in response to the public consultation about closing a number of retained stations and reorganising some stations in Oxfordshire, they have shelved their plans. So that did give a crumb of comfort to us certainly yesterday. So we don't know. The answer to your question publicly from the fire authority is this is absolutely a genuine consultation.
Could you, Gavin, see a different way of because the bottom line is that old thing, as you know, there isn't enough money being given to run the fire stations, the current number of fire stations, and hasn't been for some years now, I understand.
Well, I think the age-old challenge really is, if there's not enough money to go around in a service, is why cut the front line? Why cut the whole purpose of the service, rather than looking at the organisation as a whole, at looking at proper corporate headquarters costs, at the significant other parts of the business. Retained fire stations at Cranborne cost about £140,000 a year, which is a very small part of the overall fire service budget. And our challenge is, why doesn't the fire service look properly long and hard at serious cost reductions in the corporate animal that is the fire service? Look at various layers of management and structures in the sort of whole-time part of the non-operational part of the fire service. By their very nature, retained fire stations in small villages are low cost, and a very large part of a community presence and reassurance, but a very small cost to the wider taxpayer and certainly to the fire service. So I think that is another way, and that's certainly a challenge that's being made, is what is the ratio of back office staff to front office staff? Well, for Dorset and Wiltshire, I think it's the fifth highest back office cost to front office staff, to frontline firefighter staff across the English fire authorities, and that's certainly formed part of our challenge to the fire authority.
It does sound rather like putting the cart before the horse.
Well, I suppose it's the same as sort of getting rid of nurses when you're worrying about the sort of cost of the NHS. The whole point of these services is the frontline stuff that's provided, and often I think people forget about the sort of looking properly service-wide. And I think, to play devil's advocate, if the chief fire officer was sat here on this call, he would say that the merging of Dorset and Wiltshire Fire Service in 2016 enabled significant savings across the two authorities that were merged into one. However, that was in 2016, nearly 10 years ago, and the one fire authority is a pretty large, expensive beast in terms of its frontline cost versus the back office cost.
So would it be cheaper, do you think, if they were separated again?
Well, no, I don't think that. I think rather like unitary authorities, you are saving on executive costs, which is some of the big stuff. Chief fire officers, assistant chief fire officers, deputy chief fire officers, HR staff, all the sort of large central services. You would be doubling those up. I think it's the same when East Dorset and Purbeck and West Dorset and North Dorset councils all merged to become Dorset Council. There are savings, I'm sure, to be had from at a corporate level. But actually, what happens in the fire service is you've still got to have your relied upon local services when they're needed. Part of the challenge that we've been making is that some of the data that's been presented to the fire authority about how busy fire stations are excludes a lot of important work and a lot of active firefighting that those stations do. And our challenge has been the data. The data is not incorrect, but it's what it omits that is incorrect. I can tell you the last 4 times my pager has gone off to various incidents in the last 3 weeks, it has been to jobs that, were they in the data collection period for the closure consultation, would not be counted. And that's because the last big job we went to was last week to a commercial fire in Fordingbridge overnight. And so fire alerts and fire work done by on-call fire stations on the border of Dorset and Wiltshire, if they go cross-border, those incidents have not counted in the data. We've been to a large heath fire just before Easter down near Wareham. Again, that's in our specialist 4x4 heath vehicle. Those shouts have not been counted in the data. We've been alerted to a time when Salisbury was very busy and they were out on another job, and quite often retained fire stations are asked to go and stand by in town centre stations when they're busy, so that if there's another incident that comes in this example Salisbury, we could then respond so that Salisbury is kept safe. Those incidents they've been excluded from the data. So if you want to say Cranborne's not very busy as a fire station, you're excluding all those shouts. And as far as being a retained firefighter is concerned, I'm still getting up in the middle of the night. I'm still jumping up from my desk in the village. I'm still, leaving my gym or whatever I'm doing to jump on a fire service vehicle and respond to an emergency to keep either property or lives safe. And so what the data has excluded has been a major part of our challenge, and certainly locally saying to people, the narrative that Cranborne isn't very busy is not the whole picture.
So the picture is definitely skewed from what you've been saying. I think what most of us don't realise is that if it is a major incident, firefighters will be called from far away from the actual area to help out because the local services have not got the capacity to handle it.
Yes. And what these closures do by taking 90 firefighters and 8 fire engines out of the 50 that operate in Dorset and Wiltshire is further reducing that resilience you've alluded to. When there's a thatch fire, that'll normally take between 5 and 10 fire engines from a huge area. We've responded to thatch fires on the Salisbury Plain, the other side of Dorchester, all over the New Forest. Geography and distance doesn't count when you just need people and resources to help fight a fire. But geography and distance does count when you're trying to think about portraying a picture that a particular fire station isn't very busy. That's what seems unfair.
And of course, one has to think that if you're called to an incident which is miles away, the emergency that's called the fire engine out simply has a chance to worsen, doesn't it?
Yeah, so the response times, I think, is what you're talking about.
Yes, response times, yeah.
So if you're removing geographically located stations, small or large, you're increasing the response times to the next nearest available fire engine, and that is part of the data. And part of the data the fire service has produced to the fire authority in asking them to consider their recommendation to close these stations is based on a theoretical algorithmic response time, which assumes that every single fire engine would be available 100% of the time if an alert went off, and it's used a calculation from that sort of algorithmic calculation, as it were, about how long it would take to respond. But we know the next nearest fire engine to Cranborne is Verwood, but our station ground, which is the sort of the definition of the area of the map we go to that's counted as exclusively Cranborne's ground, goes right up towards Coombe Bissett, over towards Broad Chalk, goes right up towards Tollard Royal and down towards near Farnham and Blandford, and sort of cuts underneath Verwood. It's a huge area. If Verwood were coming to a job where we were going to Woodyates, the other side of Sixpenny Handley, which is in itself quite a large village, it would take them. They take 5 minutes to get to their fire station, and then to get on the fire engine and come to there. Then it's going to add another sort of 15 minutes onto these response times. That's the real life response times, not the theoretical 100% availability. Then you've got to assume that Verwood are not on another job or can't get a crew because a couple of them have gone away to watch the football, or it's the daytime and people are working away from Verwood. So the thing about the fire service is our contention is that the retained model is peculiar. This is people that have other jobs, main incomes, but choose because they live or work, or a combination of both, in their communities to try and keep a vital service going. And they respond locally with great local knowledge, often knowing most of the people they go to, and quickly, and have a great sort of rapport with their local fire ground. They do it, but it's cheap. And that if they weren't there, it's the moment you want them to come, that suddenly they're not there. And you can't factor that in. It's an emotional decision, and that's the appeal we're trying to make to people in responding to the consultation. It's your property, it's your loved one, it's your person that needs to be cut out of a car, in a critical amount of time. It's about the response time. It's about whether the alternative pump is available. All those factors. To coin a phrase, you're rather in the same boat as the RNLI, then, aren't you? Yeah. Although actually, interestingly, I think as a charitable funded organisation, they're in a slightly better position. They're sort of slightly free of the sort of funding, central government funding formula and the council tax way that the local authority divvies up its money to the fire service. I've got some sympathy with the reduction in the sort of grant coming from central government and the ability to raise a local council tax. The politics of dealing with local authority members who have to get elected. And when they may turn around to their household and say, we're putting the council tax up to pay a larger precept for the fire service. I can understand the emotion and the politics behind that. If anybody chooses to look at their council tax bill, if you see what goes to the fire service versus the other items that are itemised in your council tax bill, particularly the Police and Crime Commissioner, you think, wow, we're getting really good value money for this for life-saving frontline service that actually is largely run by part-timers who have other jobs.
And of course, you never know when you might have need of that reassuring big red fire engine.
But it's a bit like the sort of snowplows at Heathrow scenario. Is that you sort of they're there, but they're not used very often. But my goodness, when you need them, you really need them.
Now, you mentioned earlier, Gavin, that there is a public consultation open. So how do we access that? How do we make our views and our feelings known?
Well, the fire service has got it published on its own website. There are a number of most of the affected fire stations in Dorset and Wiltshire have their own little sub-website or campaign site. Certainly the one for Cranborne is a page on the Cranborne estate website, cranborne.co.uk. There's some data and facts on there. There are also QR codes which you can easily scan that take you straight to the consultation. And there are important things to say in the consultation, which are some of the things I've been mentioning, is that the data excludes a number of things that the fire service in these local retained stations does. It doesn't really give a true picture of true response times if the fire station was to close. I think those are the things. But also I think vignettes of where the fire service has saved a property, saved a life, saved someone in a car, I think are really useful things to make over to the fire authority. It will come down to 18 people at a public fire authority meeting in June, where they will vote to take the chief fire officer's recommendation or not. Now that may be all 8 fire stations closing, it may be none of them, it may be a combination. We just don't know. We're hoping that they all survive, rather like they have done in Oxfordshire. We're also hoping that everybody could rattle up their MP. Our local MP to here, Simon Hoare, has been particularly vocal, has been helping and has joined forces with some of the South Wiltshire MPs by having early day motions and organising meetings with the fire minister in trying to get the funding formula readdressed, but also in raising sort of awareness at Century. In fact, the Robert Morris, I think is it Robert Morrison, Dr. Morrison, the MP for South Wiltshire, raised a question actually of the Prime Minister at PMQs about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So that awareness campaign, and I think MPs and local councillors respond to volumes of clearly thought out challenges to what's happening locally. So I don't think it's rent a letter, but if you can make your points clear by emailing your MP, that would be great.
And of course, the what it really comes down to in the end is the whole thing needs a bit more funding from central government.
Yes, or central government to give the respective authorities in Dorset and Wiltshire the ability to put an additional levy on council tax. But that's not to say that there are parts of the fire service, as we talked to at the beginning of this, that could look to cut their cloth accordingly too, not just frontline services. So I think a combination of revising the funding formula from central government, a combination of central government giving the local authority the opportunity to think about how they recharge for the fire service through council tax, but also some sort of encouragement for making sure cloth is cut accordingly.
Gavin Fauvel, a Fire Brigades Union member for Cranborne Fire Station. And of course, much of what he had to say regarding Cranborne applies to the other 7 fire stations that might be closed. Working her trusty Harris loom in the Walford Mill Craft Centre in Wimborne is silk weaver Debbie Kirby. She creates the most exquisite works of art in fine silk, scarves, wall hangings and silk accessories like makeup bags and specs cases, all woven using top-quality fine silk, which she dyes herself. I had the pleasure of talking to Debbie, who is very firmly rooted in Dorset.
Dorset, born and bred, Jenny. Yes, I was very lucky. I was brought up in Poole, right by the sea. Went off to Art College in Surrey for 3-4 years, and then back to Poole, and we now live just outside Blandford.
And so you're not very far away from where you grew up. So very much your heart is in this county.
Oh, absolutely. Dorset girl, because of just, the beautiful Jurassic coast, lovely countryside walks. We're very lucky that we live in a little village with beautiful walks all around. I can't really imagine moving anywhere else now.
What a very nice thing to hear. So you just mentioned the lovely walks, being in a village in the rural, all the surrounded by lovely countryside and the Jurassic coast, and you've been artistic since you were a child. So, what sort of things did you paint your native county? Did you paint the local scenery when you were a child?
I didn't know. I was always very much into colour and sort of assembling things and putting things together. And I always found it hilarious that I passed my art O-level and A-level very well, although I can't actually draw and paint. So I don't quite know how that worked anyway. But really, right from an early age, I was always going to have done something artistic.
So were you doing collages then, Debbie?
I was making collages, I was painting quite big abstracts. I was building quite a lot of things as well. I mean, one of my earliest childhood memories was building card houses, which I was very good at, and I used to build little villages. And so sort of actually seeing how things were put together, which is quite interesting because that is pretty much weaving and textiles that I do now, is how you put threads together and actually build things.
So you had it in your fingers even then. Did you build little people as well to put inside your village?
I used to try to. They were definitely sort of stick people, I think, and also, hilariously, no sense of scale at all. So great big people living in little teeny tiny houses.
So it was an upside down world then, in a way, wasn't it, that you were creating?
Absolutely, yes. But it always followed me on. So right the way through school, it was always the arts, and I used to love creative writing, loved history of art, and very lucky that I had parents who were also incredibly supportive. So there was never any real doubt that I would go on to art college straight after school.
But it's interesting, Debbie, that having done these big stick insect people for the villages and the houses, the little villages and the houses, that you decided that it was graphic design that you wanted to do when you did this foundation course at Bournemouth University.
I know. I still don't quite know how everything has led to where I am now, actually, Jenny, because when I went to do the foundation course, I think I was definitely sort of thinking three-dimensional design. And then I tried that because you have different blocks of different sort of disciplines there. And I wasn't that wild with working with great lumps of wet clay. And then I tried photography, which I enjoyed. And then I tried printmaking, which was great fun. And then I came to graphic design because I loved the division of space. Actually dividing up, let's say, a piece of paper and actually making it visually appealing.
And but what was it then that turned you, or was it your tutors who spotted something in you that turned you towards, or they suggested textiles?
Well, no, it was actually really interesting that I'd gone right the way through the year's foundation. The tutors there were saying, yes, graphic design, go and apply to do graphic design. And so I filled in my application form. And I went off for an interview at, I think it was Middlesex, and they turned me down for graphic design, but said, there's something in your work. I think you need to go and see our textile department. And so I popped along there. Very nice tutor there said, yes, I can definitely see some textile influences in your work. So I came back to Bournemouth and I reapplied. Didn't know anything about textiles really, Jenny, at all. And it was only doing a little bit of research to see what were the best art colleges, and Farnham and Winchester were the two best art colleges to study textile design. And I applied to Farnham, and I was very lucky, and I got in. So it was all a little bit, it wasn't any deep-seated sort of thing that I'd always wanted to be a weaver. And I was, as I say, very fortunate that somebody saw I was heading in slightly the wrong direction and then got me back onto the path that I've been on now for, 44 years.
Well, wasn't that a happy thing then that those people spotted a latent talent in you for textiles?
Yes, or at least something where my work definitely leaned more towards textiles. And it was the best 3 years, really, once I realised that it was weaving, because there's something lovely about weaving because it's using quite a bit of mathematics as well, and still very much about proportion, but also, as I say, sort of building. So you're actually constructing something, and so you're having to visualise it in 3 dimensions. So yes, it's something that has just fascinated me all these years.
And of course it's very tactile, isn't it?
Very tactile, absolutely. And weaving in very, very fine silk, which is not the most obvious choice of yarns to use when you are a weaver, I still get such a thrill out of finishing off a run of scarves off the loom, and because they all have to be washed and ironed before I can then put them out onto the shelves. And it's just lovely to feel them and just go, gosh, I've actually made that. And that has never vanished, which is wonderful.
That's wonderful. You mentioned you ironing the silk. I always iron the silk scarves that I have with feelings of considerable trepidation and a very cool iron.
Well, you ought to come and see me do it because it's the complete opposite. It's very funny. It's using good old fairy liquid, because that's actually quite a nice, thorough, gentle, non-detergent. And then I will then actually wring the scarf out so that it's pretty damp, put the iron onto the hottest setting, and then put the scarf on top of a towel and then iron directly onto the scarf, which people find horrifying. But that is...
It sounds like just the opposite of what I was always told you did with scarf, the coolest iron.
Well, no, this is the way that I always tell people, and it's great fun because customers will come back in and say, "Gosh, you were absolutely right. Yes, hot iron, iron it from wet to dry, and it comes up beautifully bouncy and shiny and without any creases." So,
well, thank you very much for that tip. I shall try that and not forget the towel underneath. Now, so Debbie, to go back to your time at the West Surrey College of Art in Farnham, what did you have to cover in the course?
The very first the very, very first term, we were doing a block on block printing, lino cutting, and I quickly realised that didn't really appeal to me. So I was thinking, that's okay, there'll be another block, there'll be something else to do. And then the second block was actually weaving, it was working with very, very fine wool. So not just weaving, but we had to learn how to spin it, we had to learn how to dye it, and then weave it. And I didn't enjoy that either. It was very thick, kind of quite earnest, rusty colours, and it just didn't appeal to me. It was very strange, and it was only when we had a wonderful tutor that came in, a woman called Mary Restio, who I think is still weaving today, and she did a 6-week block with us, which was silk weaving, silk dyeing and silk weaving, and that's when I had my alleluia moment and went, that's it, that's what I want to do.
I'm wondering, Debbie, whether it was perhaps I imagine you going around the local sheep fields and picking bits of wool off the barbed wire fence.
We were.
And then, of course, there is also the fragrance, if one can call it that, the smell of the unwashed wool.
Yes, I didn't even mention that bit. Yes, we were all sent out to the fields to go and get the wool from the barbed wire. And then the smell of lanolin as you have to wash it. So yes, so we were bringing back handfuls of very dirty wool and then having to wash it, and then you have to card it, to make little rolags, and then you had to spin the rolags into a yarn. And I think even at the age of 18, 19, I was thinking, this is just taking too long. This is ridiculous. And also handling the wool. I'm not great at working with wool because I'm slightly allergic to it anyway. So I think it was sort of destined to doom right from the start, weaving with wool.
Yes. But of course there is, and silk doesn't have the same smell as wool, does it? I imagine that I get the impression that there's a touch of impatience, that you want to get to the finished product fairly quickly.
I do, which again is very entertaining, because silk weaving is such a long process. But the great thing about being slightly impatient with it is that a lot of the process to do with getting the silks onto the loom is all the hard work is done before you actually start to weave. So I make myself do the slightly more boring long jobs, like threading up the loom, and I make myself get through them. And I will set myself targets so that I will actually get the loom finished, and then I can go and have a piece of cake. So there's always a sort of carrot dangling. And then once I start weaving, I have endless patience, because it's just such good fun seeing the threads come to life, really.
Watching a picture assemble under your hands, as it were.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the great fun thing now, is that I'm doing quite a lot of work where I'm not just making scarves and pieces for interiors. I'm working with paper and silk.
Now, I find this fascinating. So you're actually interconnecting, as it were, the silk strands with paper.
That's right, yes. And it came to me as an idea a long time ago, actually, when I was working with a great friend of mine who was a calligrapher. And we were asked by the Arts Council, as far as I remember, to actually put on a nice big touring exhibition, collaborating, because they were very keen to bring together the two different craft disciplines. And I think calligraphy and weaving that was a very interesting combination. So we both said, yes, that would be a wonderful challenge, not really thinking about it too much until I was thinking, how am I going to get Lizzie's beautiful lettering into the silk? And then I just came up with the idea one day of, I wonder what would happen if I cut up one of her pieces and wove it through silk threads dyed in the same colour. And that's how it all started.
I'm wondering, Debbie, I think paper would always seem to be a much stiffer material than the silk.
I know, and it sounds like they wouldn't naturally work together, but I have also woven in my time aluminium through the silk. I've woven wood through the silk, and because the silk threads are pliable enough, I can actually lift them with my fingers and then push either the paper or the aluminium through gently. So I now I haven't had any problems with it for years, but when I first started, I threw a lot of them away because I used to damage the paper, because I was either hitting it too hard with the beater on the loom, or I wasn't hitting it hard enough, and therefore the image would fall out. So you could say that it wasn't a very quick process. I had to learn to get technically good at it.
Were there lots of cake breaks then to work out your frustration?
Lots of cake breaks, and as I say, working with this great friend of mine, Liz, we have a terrible sense of humour, so we were endlessly laughing and giggling. So something would go wrong, and we'd look at each other and go, "Oh, tea and digestive," and then off we'd go, and then come back to it. That's really how we managed to work together. A lot of laughter, and I've sort of carried that on right the way through, working with other people now as well.
Well, it shows that you enjoy what you're doing. I mean, that you really love it, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes. It's been a wonderful way to make a career, for well over 40 years, doing what I love doing, and I've always tried to not take it for granted.
Not many people can say that, can they?
Absolutely. My husband finally came to what he really loved doing 6 years before he retired, but he got there in the end.
He's a photographer, isn't he?
Well, he's a part-time photographer, and he was working for an auction house. He's now retired full-time from doing that, but he still takes beautiful photos for me to work with, to then weave up into my silks as well. So you could say that he's on the family payroll now.
How lovely to be able to combine the two art forms. Can we just backtrack completely? So when you get your raw silk, your raw material, is it very fine? What is it like?
It is incredibly fine. I buy it from a company up in Macclesfield, who in turn import it in from Italy, and it comes to me on quite big cones of very tightly spun and wound silk, and it is fine enough that I need to really work with about 90 threads to the inch. So that's quite a lot of ends to have to thread up, and probably about 40 or 50 throws of the shuttle to actually weave an inch going through as the weft. So it is very, very fine.
And Italian silk is particularly lovely, isn't it?
Italian silk is the best quality that I can get, and it's got a very good ethical footprint to it as well. I was always very keen to always try and source either English or European silk right from when I first started.
So it is grown and produced in Italy then?
That's right, yes.
Tell me, just to sort of go right back to the origin, the provider of the raw silk, the larvae and their cocoons. I had heard a number of years ago that there is a technique now where they don't actually have to bump off the larvae.
That's right. Yes, which I'm very, very relieved about. And that's the silk that I have been using for the last however many years now. It's silk that has been produced from silkworms that have not been boiled. So, as I say, it has actually got a really nice footprint to it.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear you say that, Debbie.
Yes, exactly. I mean, when I first started, sort of, over 40 years ago now, my big thing was to not source silk from places where child labour features, and so that always directed me back to either the UK or Europe.
And when you sell your silk scarves or your works of art, do you provide that sort of information?
I do. I'm always happy to tell people exactly where things have come from. It's like the dyes that I use to dye the silk. They aren't natural dyes, but they are beautiful eco dyes. So the colour is actually attached to the silk threads by boiling the colour on. So they actually come to me in very concentrated powder form, and then it's up to me to mix and match. And then the colour becomes fixed on the silk when you've actually boiled the colour onto the silk threads, and then all the colour vanishes from the dye bath and you're left with an absolutely clear dye bath. So there's nothing nasty going down the sink at all.
Wonderful. And that's all gone into silk. And again, the sort of horrifying idea of boiling silk and then you iron it with the hottest possible iron.
I know. People do go, really? Really? I thought silk you had to treat with the utmost love and respect. And I do, but I am just quite firm with it as well. And I did learn years and years ago that you can be quite rough with it. Silk is tough, and especially if it's a good quality silk and it's been woven well, it's been made well, and it's been dyed properly so that it's light fast and colour fast. Washing should be a really easy job of it. And I just like, hopefully everything that I've made over the last however many years will still be giving people pleasure in sort of years to come. You know, the silk scarves, I did a lovely party 10 years ago to celebrate 30 years of weaving. So I called it my 30th, and lots of my scarves came back to see me with their owners, which was lovely. And it was great fun trying to date when I'd actually woven the scarves that came back. And I'm doing something similar this year to celebrate 40 years. And again, I'm asking as many customers to come wearing things that they've bought from me. And it'll just be great fun to see them again.
And when are you going to be doing that?
That's going to be at the wonderful place where I work, Walford Mill Craft Centre in Wimborne. I'm having a lovely big, I wouldn't say a farewell show because I'm not stopping weaving, but I am retiring from the mill just before Christmas. And I thought it would be lovely to do a big summer party. And so that's on the 1st of August, which is a Saturday. And hopefully going to have a lot of customers, past and present, and hopefully some future ones as well. And it should just be a lovely day celebrating 40 years.
And if you're not retiring, but you're carrying on weaving, you will take your wonderful loom with you.
I will. Poor loom has not been packed up and moved for 20 years. So I'm going to have to try to remember exactly how it comes to pieces and then gets reassembled. Once we know how that happens, again, I'll have to remind myself, it takes about an hour. So it's not dramatic. And we've been quite organised back here. We've got a lovely little studio now built in the garden, waiting to house my loom and hopefully for me to be able to work from home at a slightly more leisurely pace.
And will you have a nice view from your loom shed?
I've got a lovely loom actually because it looks down the garden towards our lovely house, and there's a lot of greenery, and I will get all the afternoon and evening sun. So it is a pretty special spot in the garden.
And if you needed any more inspiration, you would only have to look out of the window, I suppose.
Exactly. Only have to look out of the window, pop out for a quick walk, or head off to my favourite place down by the coast and Kimmeridge, and just have a lovely walk along the beach with my husband, with his camera.
And of course, you'll have plenty of opportunity for nice, easy cake breaks, won't you?
Absolutely. Going to look forward to looking up some more good cake recipes as well. I think it's time to spend a bit more time in the kitchen, but not dyeing the silks. I think time to enjoy cake and weave.
Silk weaver Debbie Kirby. Have a look in the April issue of the BV magazine to see photos of some of her work and of her famous Harris loom. Finally, in this April 2026 edition of the BV podcast, Trevor Bailey, who's a long-standing rural development advocate and resident of the village of Bourton. He wrote an open letter in the magazine in which he argues that current government housing policy is leading to an unprecedented assault on rural England, in his words. And of course, he's speaking more personally about Dorset. When I spoke to Trevor, I said that I sensed real anger in his article.
There is anger. It's not just because of what's happening locally, although that obviously in our own village is pretty significant. It is a matter of the sheer crudeness of the policies that are bringing this about. I mean, if you compare what the Labour government did after the war with what the Labour government is doing now, you see the contrast. Then, even when there was enormous pressure economically because of the effects of the conflict, it was possible to build council houses, low-rent houses, so that people could stay in their villages. Now we have a policy which is build, 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 which means simply handing over the countryside, really, to developers to do as they wish. Now that sounds like an exaggeration, but it's not much of an exaggeration. And the problem that arises, of course, is that inevitably developers want to build expensive houses for people who already have houses and money to buy houses. And they advertise them in London. And at the end of the day, what actually happens, I mean, I don't want to be offensive about it, but it does end up with further disgorging of retired London professionals into the countryside, which is one of the main reasons why house prices have been so high in rural areas. And it doesn't matter. I mean, it's fine to have a mixed community, but when one economic group becomes terribly dominant, that makes life very difficult for others. Such people of reasonable wealth don't need rented houses. They don't need public transport. They probably don't need local shops. We end up, by degrees, and it's already gone an awfully long way, with a countryside without country families left in it at all. Those really, I think, are the principal reasons for my anger about all of this. It's almost as though politicians see urbanisation as progress, as the very definition of progress, as if no other form of community existence can be. And that is very problematic, I think.
Is it also, Trevor, partly a question of an imposition of, in this case, housing? It could be solar farms, it could be wind turbines, on an area of low population, because that means low opposition.
Yes. And what is really worrying about this, of course, is the undemocratic nature of the whole thing. I mean, what's happening in our own village here, Borton, is that we're going to get 80 new houses, which have been awarded on appeal after having been rejected by Dorset Council and opposed by the mass of the population. There's also the prospect of another 125 houses in the local plan. Now that together would virtually double the population, and of course add another 250 or more cars. That changes the whole place, socially, economically, environmentally. And it also opens huge further areas to potential development, because these sites that have been approved are outside the neighbourhood plan area. The neighbourhood plans are pretty much out of the window. People have worked on those, communities have worked on them carefully and at considerable expense, and they no longer mean anything. So that's part of it. But I think it's also exactly what you suggested. Unless you have the weight of numbers, you really don't have any great impact. And it's a foolish idea to think that the countryside is some kind of open space where nothing happens and which can be utilised simply to provide sort of life support systems for the cities, which is what's going on here, really. I mean, to take the whole issue of electricity generation, obviously we do have to have sustainable energy creation, but it's not sensible, as far as I can see, to take enormous areas of productive land, and some of the proposals are truly enormous, and turn them into power stations, essentially for the cities where most power is consumed. You have to have, obviously, great battery installations as well as the solar panel and wind farm installations themselves. You have to have transmission lines running across country, all entirely new. The old ones are in the wrong places, of course. And it seems so obvious that there is no reason at all why energy should not be generated where it is most consumed, in the cities themselves. I mean, look out over London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Glasgow. It's one vast roofscape. Now, why aren't those roofs covered in solar panels? Why aren't those enormous tower blocks covered in solar panels? You know, if even as the CPRE have advocated endlessly, just industrial and commercial buildings had to have their roofs covered in solar panels, that would be an immense acreage. But the problem is the usual one, that doing this sort of thing in the countryside, on green fields, makes more money. It's nothing to do with what's needed. It's to do with the readies that can be accumulated from it.
You say it makes more money, but why should it make more money than putting solar panels on existing, say, industrial buildings and other buildings within an urban area?
Well, I think that's absolutely true. Sensibly, it shouldn't. You would think that putting panels on an existing structure would be perfectly simple. But I think the answer is that it's easier. You know, you can grab hold of large areas of land, and you don't have to do it piecemeal, building by building, that kind of thing. And there is, to do something on industrial buildings requires a measure of compulsion, or at least expectation. And that is not present. The government is not pursuing that policy to any great extent. Those, I think, are the problems.
Now, Trevor, just to come back to, you talked about the neighbourhood plan earlier. Now, from what you say in your article, it does seem pointless and a total waste of everyone's time to put together a neighbourhood plan, since those plans don't appear to be taken into account.
Well, that is so. I mean, in our case in Borton here, and it's far from being the only one, the areas that are going to be developed are outside the neighbourhood plan boundaries. They are completely in conflict with the neighbourhood plan. And doing that, of course, opens up a whole vast area of other land within the area between the village and the bypass, for example, which developers are now bound to go for. It's only a matter of time. If you can do it in two places, you can do it in others. And the other problem is that, of course, as a place is grown, as it becomes bigger, it becomes more of a target for development, just as has happened with Gillingham. That is now several times the size it was when I first knew it. And it's already receiving enormous development now. I think it's 1,800 houses. And it will get much more. The bigger the place, the more it gets.
One of the things, and you touch on again on this in your article, one of the things that one hears time and again is how no additional infrastructure is provided or even taken into consideration in developments, particularly the large ones.
Yes, we hear a fair amount about 106 agreements. The developers will have to pay something into the coffers, which will enable there to be some provision locally. But that's not what's required. That's a one-off payment. What's required, of course, is long-term funding for additional medical facilities and staff, additional school teachers, additional care facilities. And you don't just pay for those in a one-off way. They're required long-term, for years, for decades. And there is no sign of any provision for that, certainly not in our own case here.
And you mentioned democracy earlier, and you're critical of the current government, and I guess a lot of people would very much agree with your sentiments. People do say that democracy is not alive and well when it comes to housing developments, but dead in the water. Would you agree with that?
As things are at the moment, yes. If you're going to have, I don't blame the local authorities for this, really. They're acting under direction now. They don't really have much leeway at all. But it does mean that you end up with local people not just feeling, but knowing that they can't have any impact at all. Their wishes, the wishes of the local authority that they elected that represents them, totally disregarded. And decisions made centrally, effectively on behalf of government, which are, as I said right at the beginning of this discussion, extraordinarily crude. They don't take any note of history. They don't take any note of the composition of communities. They don't take much notice of the services and facilities that are required. It's a crude bit of planning. It's just build and build. It will not do.
This is government by algorithm.
Yes. I never quite knew what that meant, but it sounds perilous, come what may.
Now, you use the phrase in your article, Trevor, that the planning system seems increasingly centralised, which is pretty much what you've just been saying, and leaves villages and small communities feeling like helpless prey.
Yes, I think that's precisely what it is. And it comes back to what you were saying earlier about small populations and the inability of those to have adequate impact. It does seem as though everything is based upon an urban concept, and that's just an absence of knowledge at government level, I think. We badly need a strong rural campaign, which I hope rural councils will take up as much as others, people like the CPR and others, in order to make any kind of impact. Because where we stand and how we feel is simply not understood.
And so much opposition to any development is simply put down to NIMBYism, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and that's really rather nasty. It's we want to live in small communities. We want to live in mixed communities with different people from different walks of life. We don't want to see the last of the country-born population shoved out. These are not extravagant things to want. They're something which, any small village wants to see. And yet it's disregarded and not understood. That's a great problem.
And of course, Trevor, there's plenty of evidence to show that small communities are healthier, flourish more, are altogether better for our species than the anonymity of a very large urban environment.
Of course they are, and it comes down partly to what you're used to, of course, but I've lived in the country all my life, and I lived in this village for most of it. And the thought of having to exist in a totally different way, to have to live in a place where there are an awful lot of people you never really meet and never really know, it is anathema. It's just not what we're about. It's not the kind of people we are. And I think, this has to be taken seriously. You're asking people not just to convert their communities, but to convert themselves into a different kind of animal. And that won't do.
Are there others who feel like you in that respect?
Yes, there are. And an awful lot, I think. And I talk to all sorts of people about it. And I get this sort of feeling of some despair coming from a lot of people, particularly people who've lived here for a long time. And, when you get to that stage, we really can't, the idea that we really can't influence anything, we can't change anything, we can't protect anything, then you begin to worry very seriously. It's a matter of, as you said earlier, of health. This is not a healthy situation to be in. It's a terrible feeling of being preyed upon, of being treated as some kind of, a vessel for very unwelcome change. Certainly rural areas have got to do their bit when it comes to the problems of the country. But you're not going to solve housing problems by building more and more and more and more expensive houses, which attract people from outside. We need low rented housing for people who cannot afford houses at all. So-called affordable housing still has to be bought. If you can't afford actually to buy a house, then you're in a different category again. You have to rent, and it has to be a reasonable rent. The Labour government that built council houses after the war saw this and did something about it. A modicum of decent rented houses in villages would be very welcome, I'm sure. But not something that just sells you to the urban world.
To come back to the greenfield, so the greenfield sites versus brownfield sites, which you mentioned earlier, and as you say, there are, and plenty of people say the same thing, that there are lots of brownfield sites in urban areas. Now, presumably, those are harder to develop, and also harder to sell houses that might be built on them.
I don't know about whether it's not as harder to sell. Houses in cities tend to sell pretty well. Yes, it is more expensive or shall we say less profitable, to build on brownfield sites. Of course it is. And that's the reason why developers want green fields. That's where profits can be maximised. But if we're only talking about maximising profits rather than need, surely we're really on the wrong wicket altogether. The whole excuse for all this development is housing need. Let's treat it as need and not as opportunity to make cash.
Trevor, you raise one extremely important and very timely matter in your article, that of the fact that this country is a long way from being self-sufficient in food. Is enough attention being paid by development decision makers to the need to keep farmland productive rather than concreted over, do you think?
No, I don't think it comes into planning considerations very much at all, if at all. Planning concerns are very limited, in fact. I'm not the world's expert, but that's fairly evident when you come to try and protest about some planning proposal, because your protest only has any meaning if it corresponds to a very few parameters. We are importing nearly half of the food that we eat. That makes us, in any kind of emergency, including the present one, incidentally, very vulnerable. And that's a rather foolish position to be in. If you're going to start consuming very significant amounts of productive land, and that is being done, you must inevitably be further limiting the amount of food production that there can be. And it's most unwise. It's taking us in entirely the wrong direction. We should be producing more food, not less. We have a population approaching 70 million, and it's growing still. That's not being planned for in terms of food production or the future of farming. Which is why I say really that, what we're seeing is a kind of war, really, not just on beauty, not just on the coherence of communities, but also on farming and food production. Vital things for a country like this one. We know we're crowded. We know we have a major problem in terms of accommodating everybody. But you can't destroy even small amounts of food production and still expect to come out the other side glowing. You won't be.
It could be said, I suppose, that the government, with the government's mantra of build, 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 we've got to have more houses, that there is perhaps a certain blinkered stance in Whitehall about the effects, the actual effects on the ground of that decision.
I don't think government at present understands rural life at all. I think we are thought of as a sort of hinterland, as an area which is not being exploited sufficiently. And it must be, I suppose, difficult for people who've spent most of their lives involved with an almost entirely urban situation to actually understand that there is a somewhat different world out here, even now in the 21st century. And it's almost as though people have missed some level of their education. They cannot understand these things. I'm glad to say that. I mean, I've been pushing my thoughts around to various politicians, and I had a very long response from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, which was very largely cut and paste, I think. But I did get a very interesting reply from Gideon Amos, the Liberal Democrat spokesman on housing and communities, who was very strongly in agreement and tells me that he is trying to push these concerns that we're discussing strongly in the Commons. Now, there's always a difference in politics between words and action, but that at least was encouraging. Some people I've sent things to haven't replied at all. Which for MPs I think is rather bad. I won't name any names. But it has penetrated a bit further. In Wiltshire, Andrew Murrison, MP in South West Wiltshire, Tory in his case, has written in the Blackmore Vale magazine recently, bringing up just some of these points. He did reply to me when I sent my missive to him. So I think there are differences in political attitudes. And I suppose if one's being really cynical about it, these concerns don't arise so much in Labour constituencies as they do in others.
Finally, Trevor, you've talked about writing to MPs. What can we as individuals, the rural dwellers, the helpless prey, in your words and from your article, what can we try and do to try and stop what might call a tide of housing developments from flooding our landscape?
We have to be heard. I think it's a matter of trying to get the councils in rural counties to band together and get their voices heard. So you have to tackle them. You have to tackle councillors. I mean, I've been carrying on a dialogue with the leader of Dorset Council, who I must say does respond very well. We have to write to the media. We have to get stuff in the media. We have to do just what we're doing now and get our voices heard. We have to fight like hell, because this is becoming something of a serious emergency for the future of rural life. You can only go so far in devouring the land and in devouring rural tradition before it all disappears completely. So I think it's a matter really of get after your elected representatives as strongly as you possibly can, your MPs, your councillors. Don't stop. Just keep on bombarding them, pointing out the major points that need to be pursued and getting them to voice this sort of thing. And if you happen to be in a Labour constituency, do it doubly hard, because that's where most impact can be made. But I think also the media have a very strong role to play. And again, we have the same problem in that the national media have very little understanding of of things that go on in rural areas. They think we're rather quaint, I believe, but there we go. I think I'm glad to see that the Blackmore Vale is taking this very seriously. And I think, even local as it is, that's important. But you have to shout. You've got to be noisy. You've got to be what we are not habitually in the countryside. We've to be heard.
We have to go against our usual British thing of just keeping our heads down and feeling there's nothing we can do.
That's right. We mustn't be polite, I'm afraid, this time. It's gone beyond that stage. Because I think, and as I headed in one version of my article, this whole thing is a terrible mistake. It's going in completely the wrong direction, and without sensitivity, without any sensitivity to the structure and the well-being of communities. And that is genuinely serious, and it's changing things for the future, which will mean that we simply can't get back.
Trevor Bailey. And if you agree with Trevor and feel that democracy and local democracy is under attack and are concerned that the voice and opinions of local people are being ignored, then maybe you could follow his advice and do what he's done. And with that, we come to the end of this April 2026 edition of the BV Podcast. And next month, a change is coming to the podcast. So do join me, Jenny Devitt, then to find out just what that will be. So until next month, bye-bye.